What's up guys, this video is the fifth and final in a series on the best leveling builds in Diablo 4, and in this video we're going to talk about the best build to level a Sorcerer. Now this may just be the most powerful build in the entire game, easily the highest burst build I have ever seen so far, and no, it does not include Hydra. Now let's dive into the skills first. Now we're basically going to be putting together a build that is focused around vulnerability, around being frozen, and around having a barrier and having them being stunned. All of these things are going to cause increased damage, and a lot of it. So let's begin. First up, Arc Lash. We're getting this because we're going to use this in one of our enchantment slots. The enchantment effect. When you use a cooldown, enemies around you are stunned for half a second. We get huge bonuses when enemies are stunned, and a lot of the lightning skills will cause stuns. So this is a great enchantment effect. We're going to go over to Spark. The reason we're using Spark is this is our primary skill to generate mana. We're going to get Enhanced Spark. Each time it hits its primary target, it's going to hit 3 additional enemies. It will deal 20% increase to a primary target if it doesn't hit those additional enemies. We're also going to get Glinting Spark. It grants 2% increased critical strike chance per 3 seconds, up to 10% increased critical strike chance. Critical strikes will be important for this build. If we move over to the core, we're going to put 1 point into Fireball so that we can have it as the enchantment effect. This is probably the most powerful enchantment effect for the Sorcerer. As you can see in this gameplay footage, anytime someone is killed, they just explode and does a bunch of damage. So this is super powerful. The enchantment effect reads, when you kill an enemy, they explode in a fireball for 50% of its damage. This is awesome. Greatest enchantment ever. Definitely include this pretty much in every build. I just think it's the strongest. When it comes to your core skill, Chain Lightning. And the reason I'm saying Chain Lightning is because it was so strong in the open beta. This does 58.8% of your damage, bounces around. We can upgrade it. Enhanced Chain Lightning. Chain Lightning gains a 3% increased critical strike chance per bounce. Wow. If Chain Lightning bounces off of you, its next hit deals 25% increased damage. Huge bonus, right? Chain Lightning did so much damage in the open beta. We learned in the beta feedback notes from the developers that this ability's damage was reduced, and it was also additionally reduced against bosses. Will this build still be good? I still think so. We could even just switch over to Charged Bolts because this had its damage increased, mana cost decreased, so you could switch over and use Charged Bolts instead of Chain Lightning, but we're just gonna have to see how big the nerf to Chain Lightning was, if it's still viable. Hopefully it still is. Very, very strong skill. Now, we're also gonna get Devastation, maximum mana increased by 9. That's gonna be very helpful for this build. And we're gonna put 3 points into Elemental Dominance, 12% increased damage when you cast above 50 mana. Awesome. Okay, let's move over to the defensive. We have a bunch of defensive skills, very, very strong ones. First of all, Teleport. This is necessary because number 1, gives you Unstoppable. Gotta have Unstoppable in every single build that you put together, and this is your source of Unstoppable. Also helps you get around better. Teleport's cooldown is reduced by half a second per enemy hit, up to 3 seconds. Awesome. And then Mystical Teleport for 4 seconds after teleporting, Crackling Energy hits 2 additional enemies. The way Crackling Energy works, basically as you use lightning skills, Crackling Energy will appear. You pick it up, and then it's going to zap enemies that are near you and deal damage to them. And you can see on the bar there's like a little Crackling Energy token sort of that shows how many you have and how many you could have, and yeah, they're pretty good. Over here we're gonna get Glass Cannon. You deal 18% increased damage but take 9% more damage. Not a problem because we're also going to get Ice Armor. This is awesome. It's a barrier, and the build has lots of different bonuses when you have a barrier. That's why this is very strong. Barrier of Ice forms around you for 6 seconds, absorbing a percentage of your base life in damage, and while it's active, 10% of the damage you deal is added to the barrier. That is so strong. That's amazing ability. We're gonna get Enhanced Ice Armor. While Ice Armor is active, your mana regeneration is increased by 25%. This is important because while we're above 50 mana, we deal more damage, remember? And then we're gonna get Mystical Ice Armor. Damage against vulnerable enemies contributes 100% more to Ice Armor's barrier. This is big because, again, this is a vulnerable build as well. And we're gonna get that vulnerability from Frost Nova. Unleash a torrent of frost, freezing enemies around you for 2 seconds. Down here we got Enhanced Frost Nova. Killing enemies frozen will reduce its cooldown by 2 seconds, up to 6 seconds per cast. Very nice. Then we're gonna get Mystical Frost Nova. Frost Nova makes enemies vulnerable for 4 seconds, increased to 8 seconds against bosses. That is a key part of this build. Moving over to Conjuration, 1 point into Align the Elements. You're gonna get 5% damage reduction against elites. For each second you haven't taken damage, from 1 up to 50. So you basically get 50% damage reduction with a single point. Amazing until you start taking damage from elites. And then we've got Protection. Using a cooldown grants 30% of your maximum life as a barrier for 5 seconds. That's amazing because we have 4 skills that have cooldowns. We've got all of our defensive skills and our ultimate, and we're just going to get barriers nonstop. This is shocking how good this is. Okay, let's move over to Mastery. This is where we're going to get some of our lightning skills as well. Static Discharge, Lucky Hit, Critical Strikes with shock skills have a 15% chance to form a crackling energy. Remember, you pick those up and they shock people. Invigorating Conduit, upon absorbing crackling energy, you gain 12 mana. Definitely always have your mana high, so this is great. And then finally, Shocking Impact. Every time you stun an enemy, you deal 45% lightning damage to them. Very, very good, because if you remember in the beginning, our enchantment was Lightning Arc. When you use a cooldown, enemies around you are stunned for half a second. Amazing. So that means they're also getting 45% lightning damage done to them every time you use a cooldown. Very, very awesome. I love this interaction with that Arc Lash enchantment. Very, very strong. Okay, let's move on to the ultimate. Unstable Currents. I'm sure you could have guessed it. Lightning surges within you for 10 seconds. Whenever you cast a shock skill, a random core, conjuration, or mastery shock skill is also cast. This is awesome. Just tons of lightning damage. Great ultimate ability. Get the upgrade to increase your attack speed by 25% while it's on. And then you can get crackling energy continually pulses and consumes no charges while this is going on. So that is awesome. It's just going to keep pulsing without you losing charges as this ultimate goes on. So that's sweet. We're also going to get Coursing Currents. Hitting enemies with a shock skill increases your critical strike chance by 3% over and over and over, but it resets upon getting a critical strike. So you're going to have pretty much guaranteed critical strikes with this build. I love it. We're going to get Conduction, 9% movement speed whenever you critically strike with shock skills. Awesome. You're moving around fast. And then finally, Convulsions, really big part of the build here. Lucky Hit, shock skills have a 9% chance to stun enemies for 3 seconds. That's huge. Really just a major part of the build because we want as much stun as possible. So we've got stuns, we've got vulnerable, we've got ways to get barriers. Remember those 3? And over here we've got Veer's Mastery. Close enemies take 10% increased damage from your shock skills and deal 20% less damage to you. Critical strikes increase these bonuses by 25% for 3 seconds. So close enemies means melee range. This is basically a melee range sorceress. Like, you are not afraid to get up in your enemies' faces and use chain lightning on them in melee range, because you're literally going to teleport into them. You're going to use Frost Nova. That's going to freeze them. They're not going to be hurting you. And then you can just deal damage to them, get that 10% increased damage. If you get a crit, that goes up to like 12% or something like that. I don't know. But basically, it's awesome. It's amazing. Tons of increased damage. And now that we've gone through the skills, I can't wait to show you guys the legendary aspects behind this build, because it's amazing what you can put together with just legendary aspects you can find from dungeons. And guys, remember, when it comes to legendary aspects, you want to look at the aspects you can get from dungeons in each zone. They're extremely important because legendaries aren't going to drop like they did in the beta, and these aspects are guaranteed from these dungeons, which means it will be in your best bet to make a build around what is available. And remember, once you get these legendary aspects from dungeons, they'll go into your Codex of Power and can be imprinted on rare items an infinite number of times, meaning as you find better gear, you can continually keep this aspect on your character. Now, when you do find a legendary item, remember that when you extract that legendary power, that can only be done once, so you'll typically want to save those aspects for more endgame gear. And remember too that these aspects we find in dungeons are going to always roll the lowest possible value, so you are going to be replacing these in the endgame. Okay, so let's start with some of the offensive aspects to show you how the skills we chose fit together into this build. So first we have Storm Swell aspect. You deal 11% increased damage to vulnerable enemies while you have a barrier, unlocked by completing Onyx Hold in Dry Steps. This is great because we've got Protection, which gives us a barrier every time we use a defensive cooldown. We've got Ice Armor, which gives us a barrier, and there's actually another aspect that's going to give us a barrier. So we're going to have barriers on pretty much the entire time whenever we choose to activate them. And anytime we use Frost Nova, that's going to make enemies vulnerable, and so that's 20% increased damage plus another 11%. If you put this on a two-hander, that's another 22%. We're now sitting at 42% increased damage to enemies from using one ability. Amazing. Let's look at our Amulet offensive aspect. We've got Aspect of Control. You deal 30% more damage to immobilized, stunned, or frozen enemies, unlocked by completing the Sunken Paragon library in Kyrgyzstan. Since this is on an amulet, this will be 45% more damage. You could even switch aspect of control with Storm Swell, so this could go up to 60% more damage. We've got stun in the build, we've got freeze in the build. You should absolutely be getting this off all the time so that you're dealing, well, in this case 45, but up to 60% more damage if you put this on the two-hander, because you are going to always be stunning and always be freezing your enemies. Huge damage bonus, absolutely huge. Then we have aspect of retribution. Now basically distant enemies have a chance to be stunned when they hit you. That's great and fine, but more importantly, you deal 30% increased damage to stunned enemies. As if this build couldn't get more increased damage. So when an enemy gets stunned, they're going to have that, assuming they're vulnerable, you've got the 42% increase, you've got the 45% increase. Let's add another 30% increase on top of that. Absolutely insane. We're now at over 100% increased damage. We've now doubled our damage with this. Absolutely insane. I'm losing it here. It's just shocking. Aspect of the expectant. This is a generic. It's in almost every build that I've been putting together. It's just so good. You use your basic skills, makes your next core skill deal more damage. It's just great. You can basically build up for when you're ready to go fight a boss and just zap them for a bunch of increased damage, up to 50% increased damage. So now we're at like 150% increased damage. You can get this from the Underroot in Skazglen. And finally, our last offensive aspect, we've got Edge Masters. Skills deal up to 24% increased damage based on your available primary resource. For us, it's mana, receiving the maximum when you have full primary resource unlocked by completing Old Stones in Skazglen. This is great because anytime we have over 50 mana, we get bonus damage. So why not just try to always have max mana when you go into a fight, so you get this maximum amount of bonus. So this is 24% increased damage. So I think we're almost at 200% increased damage now. So very, very amazing legendary aspects you can find for this build, guaranteed every time you play this game. Absolutely awesome. Now that we went through the offensive aspects, let's look at the resource aspect. So recharging aspect, each time Chain Lightning bounces off of you, gain 4 mana. That's nice because we need to have that our mana up. You can get this from Zenith in Fractured Peaks. So you can get that one really early, right when you start the game. Then we've got aspect of shared misery. Now we've got freezes, we've got stuns, and we've got vulnerable. Aspect of shared misery is going to help us spread those. So when you hit a crowd controlled enemy, there's a 30% chance for that crowd control effect to spread to another unaffected enemy. So those freezes and those stuns can spread. You can get that by completing Oblivion in Hawazar. That one's one of my favorites, honestly. And then finally, our defensive aspects. We've got aspect of might. Basic skills give you 25% damage reduction for 4 seconds, unlocked by completing Dark Ravine and Dry Steps. Love this generic aspect, so good. And we've got aspect of the protector. And this is perfect for the build because remember, for this to get that 11% or 22% increased damage to vulnerable enemies, you have to have a barrier. We've got ice armor for barrier, and we've got a protection for barrier, which is whenever you use a defensive skill. But now we also have aspect of the protector. Damaging an elite enemy grants you a barrier, absorbing damage for 10 seconds. You can get this from the Lost Archives and Fractured Peaks. So another source of getting barrier, so you're dealing that increased damage. This build's absolutely amazing. As you can see in this footage, it just does so much damage with all of the increase bonuses you can get from aspects. And there's ones that are even better than this. However, those you'll have to find from drops. Now, with those legendary aspects out of the way, let's talk about the Paragon board. So this is the starter board. Once you finish that up, you can move on to your next board. I recommend you select the Ceaseless Conduit. Crackling Energy has a 25% chance to not consume a charge when triggered, and Crackling Energy's damage increased by 2% per 20 total intelligence you have. Awesome. I mean, it's a lightning build. You're going to be building up a ton of Crackling Energy. Why not make it more efficient? After you complete that, head on over to the Static Surge Paragon board. Stunning close enemies restores 10 mana. Every time you use a cooldown, it's going to stun everyone in AoE guaranteed because of Arc Lash. Arc Lash Enchantment will always give you stuns, which will always give you mana back, and it's really important that you stay as high mana as possible because of the legendary aspects we chose. We talked about the enchantments, but I'll say it again. We're going to enchant with Fireball. This is the #1 most important enchantment. Get this one first. It increases your damage so much. Highly recommended. Get the Fireball as your first enchantment, and then your second one, Arc Lash, so that whenever you use a cooldown, you cause everyone around you to be stunned, which fits perfectly with the build. And that is the Sorcerer build. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you think about it in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe because I'll be making more Diablo 4 videos, whether it's build guides or tip videos, to be your source for Diablo 4 info. Don't forget to click that like button, and this video on the screen might be something that interests you. Check that one out, and I'll see you there in just a second.